everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to share with you my spoiler-free thoughts for Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Basterica. This is an Argentinian author, so the book was written originally in Spanish, but it has recently, I think last year, been translated in English. And I read it in English, of course. Now, first of all, I want to say that I am calling this my spoiler-free thoughts. I'm not calling this a review because I'm basically going to ramble. I didn't take any bullet points what I'm going to say. Well, I do have some bullet points of what I think is important, but I didn't structure this video at all. So this is just me going to ramble about what I felt while I was reading this book. And second of all, I don't normally read this genre. I normally read fantasy, so I don't really feel comfortable reviewing a book when I don't read anything else in that genre. That being said, I do think you can decide for yourself based on this video if you want to read the book or not. The second thing that I want to say is that I will start with spoiler-free thoughts, but by the end of the video I will go into some spoilers as well. However, I will make this very clear. First of all, you have this note here saying spoiler-free. I will change this to spoilers when I get into spoilers. Second of all, I have a timestamp here when I will get into spoilers, and I will also vocally say now we will get into spoilers. So you will not be taken by surprise and you will know when you have to leave this video if you still want to read the book and you don't want to get spoiled. But without further ado, I'm first going to tell you what the book is about in general, and then I'm going to start with sharing my thoughts. So this is a dystopian novel that is set in the near future. And in this setting, there has been a virus that infected all animals and made their meat poisonous to eat. So in the present time, in this novel, which is about 30 years after the virus, the meat industry is completely different from what we are used to. Animals are no longer consumed, but now they have special meat, which is basically human meat. And in this dystopian society, we follow one person, Marcus, who works in a slaughterhouse. He's actually pretty high up, so he doesn't really do the actual manual labor, but he needs to talk to the customers and stuff like that. And then one day, one of the customers is very happy with something that Marcus did for him, and he gifts him something special, which is very good meat, so it's really prime quality. The only problem is that the meat is still alive. So Marcus keeps this person in his shed, and a relationship evolves. Now, I think that what I found interesting in this book, which is quite common for dystopian novels in general, I think, is that you have two different factors that are going to draw you in. First of all, you have, of course, this dystopian society and what this means, how this is present in society, how this slaughtering of special meat works. And I think that this is explained very well in this book, especially, of course, because we follow somebody who is very clearly connected with this setting and with the use of humans as meat. So this is why, through Marcus' eyes, we see a lot of how this society came to be and how this is sustained. And then on the other hand, you of course have this personal arc of Marcus, which is a person who lives in this society and how he comes by knowing that he eats human meat. So I thought that both of these factors were very interesting, but I'm going to talk about the society in general a little bit more because this was what drew me into the story originally, and this is also what made me think most of all. So, first of all, you of course have that in this society you use humans as meat, but the wording that the author uses and just in general how the book is written really helps to draw the parallels between humans that are used in this book and then animals that we use in our current society. For example, when we go to the slaughterhouse and Marcus explains this to an outsider, he calls the humans heads. So when he talks about 10 heads that are for sale, he means 10 human beings. He uses the word stud. He explains how the females are inseminated, how they are transported, how they are being dismembered, and all of these things, which is explained very graphic, and I think that for some people this might be too much. But it is said in a very emotionless tone, and for me it almost read like a textbook, which is something that I enjoyed quite a lot, because I don't know about anyone else, but I have a big black hole in some parts of history in our own world. So when I see something, a movie that's based on true events, or when I read something online and I don't know what that's about, I usually look it up and I click on a link of Wikipedia or some other website with a lot of information. And that is often also told very dryly. It doesn't really say any of the emotions that you should feel. It just tells you the facts. And that was how this book was written as well, when it went over the society. And I really liked that, because that almost gave me the feeling as if this was very real, and as if I was reading something like a revolution that happened 100 years ago. So I really liked that sense of relying this information on the reader in a very dry way. And by doing so, it also drew a very strong emotion from myself, more so than when it would be very whimsical or with a lot of emotions, because the author doesn't really try to say that this is wrong. Because in the society, of course, eating humans is very normal, and it's very similar to when we eat animals. So by relying it like this, and by using these slaughterhouse terms, the parallel between our own society and this dystopian society is very clear. And this made me think about my own habits of eating meat. For example, I try to buy meat from a good source, and this kind of suits my conscience, thinking that, okay, the animals had a good life, so it's not that bad that I basically eat their meat because I enjoy eating their meat. I don't need this to survive. The only thing why I do it is out of enjoyment and because it tastes good. But when you then see this setting where some people keep house pets, so like when you would keep chickens in your garden, these people keep animals. And I suppose they would treat them well, they water them, they feed them, and then they are being used to eat. And when you read that, you really think, what kind of a sick human being do you need to be to have a bond with this other living person, living being, and then just eat them without a care in the world? But when you then draw that connection to actual animals and our world, then you do think, am I doing something wrong? So this really got in my head a little bit, because I was also thinking, well, the fact that I want the animals that I eat or that I consume, that I use the leather from, to have a good life, means that I do acknowledge that these are living beings, and these living beings have feelings, and we should show compassion, and they can feel pain. So I want them to have a good life. I know that all of this is true, because otherwise I wouldn't care if they had a good or a bad life, but I still don't really care enough to give up meat. So all of this was going through my mind, and I do think that the author did a really good job of relying all of this and making you think, because I think that the way that she formatted the story, the words that she chose, and the emotionless and very direct language that she chose was a very good way to make you think about that and to almost shock you about how emotionless this is being told. But if you would remove all the human references and replace that by animal references, this would just be our world. And that's the most shocking of this whole story. And I must say that when I was reading this, because I was listening to it on audiobook, and I was listening to it on 2x speed, so I think it was around 4 hours. And I was doing a very dull job at work, so I could listen while I was working. So during midday, I had a break and I had food with me, so lunch with meat in it. And I couldn't eat it because I was very aware that this was from an animal. And normally you don't think that. You're just eating its food, and you know this subconsciously, but you don't actively think this is from an animal. An animal was killed for me to eat this. And that day I was really thinking about that, and I thought about that for a couple of days actually. And I also think that there's a very interesting parallel here when they talk about children who were actually born in this dystopian society, so they don't really know any better. And it also made me think that this is actually us, born in a society where we eat animals and we don't really know better. So, but I will talk more about that in my spoiler section. But all of that was definitely present in the book. And I think that that's a very obvious parallel to draw. But what was also present here, and what I thought was also heartbreaking almost, is that minorities were also represented here. And it was shown what a society like that does to minorities, which is very true. And I think that that's very realistic what would happen here. So we are talking about the poor, we are talking about the elderly and the disabled. And yeah, it also made me think in our current society how they are also basically a minority that don't get everything that they should, and how we treat these people and these groups, and what happens, for instance, in this book, of course, you have the dystopian society where now humans are being used for the meat industry in general, but also used for leather. They are being used to hunt, all of these things that I will discuss a little bit more in my spoiler section. But this society is already established. But they also talk about what happened before. Because of course you have a virus, it takes place, you cannot eat meat, you cannot eat animals anymore. And then after a while, the use of special meat is legalized. But in that in-between period, a lot of things happened. And of course, this is not the focus of the book, because you follow Marcus at a later time point, but he does tell you a little bit about this earlier times and how minorities were really targeted during this period, which of course is also a very dark side of society in general, and which also made me think. And I think if that's something that you find important as well, that this is definitely a book that's going to be hard-hitting, but that is going to be something that you enjoy or should read. And if you want to think about these kinds of things and moral dilemmas in general, this is definitely something that I thought was very interesting and that I now want to know a little bit more about. Even though this was pure fiction, I think that this was done very well. And I think that this was definitely a dystopian setting that interested me more than some other ones that I read about. I haven't read a ton, but for instance, Red Rising, I think that the dystopian setting in general wasn't really well thought out. I think that it was also a little bit more sci-fi to my liking, where I think that for my dystopian settings, I like it to be more realistic, while of course this wasn't the case at all in Red Rising. And then 1984 I also read, and I think that there it's very interesting to see what the government can do and what happens when the government is going to tell you what to think and what not to think. But it wasn't as shocking as this one. So I do think in that regard that this was a very interesting book to read. Now, I also have some things that I wanted to discuss about the main character. So, as I said, the main character, Marcus, you get to know a lot about him as well and his personal life. Because of course he was born before humans were eaten. So he was born in a time point where animals were normally, you had pets, which you don't have in this dystopian society anymore. You ate meat. And so he is coming to terms with this. He also has a personal drama in his life, which has a huge impact on how he sees the meat industry. And then you have his interaction with this head, basically his house head. And I cannot go into this too deeply because spoilers, but throughout the story you are not completely sure where he stands in this society, how he thinks about it, because he has a very prominent role as his job needs in the slaughterhouse. But then on the other hand, you are in his head and you see how he feels about some of these things. So you're kind of in the middle and you're contemplating where does he stand. And then his relationship with his head further develops, and I'm not going to go too deeply into what kind of relationship this is, but what I can say is that you don't really know until the end of the book, and that this ending is really going to make you think. And that was what made the book even better. Throughout the book, I was thinking this is an amazing story, and this is something that everybody who can get over this gruesome setting should read. But then at the end, it got even better. And I think that that's very important, that you don't know the ending actually. But just know that, one, the society is very interesting to read about, and that was something that I thought was amazing, but that the personal plot that you're following of Marcus is also very interesting. And that, one, you see the society through his eyes, but then two, you see his personal struggles as well. And what I also really found very interesting, and I was just thinking about it and now I lost it. What was I saying? Yes, I know. I have my notes here, And it says that what I saw, some people say, is that the dystopian society isn't really believable in how it came to be, because this virus that would affect all animals but not humans, I'm a biomedical scientist and I can't really think of any that would really target all animals and not humans. And then the question that you would also get is, why wouldn't they just develop a vaccine for these animals? Wouldn't that be easier if you would target all your resources towards that, like what is being done now in the current time in our world, instead of just saying like, oh yeah, let's just eat humans. But I think that this is very well explained. One, why this is believable in the book. If you actually read the novel, this is explained. On the other hand, I don't really care that much if a dystopian society is believable when it is being set up, unless that is where your story is taking place. If you are following a main character during the setting up of this society, so right after the virus was infecting animals, and then the leading up to this decision of legalizing eating humans, then I would have a problem if it's not really explained that well and if it's not logical. However, we are in this story and we are following this person when everything is set up, when this society is in place and it's working and it's evolving. And then what I find important is the maintenance of this society believable? And I do think that this was the case here. So I don't really agree with that critique. I can see what they mean, but I also feel like they might have DNF'd this book before it was explained, because that does make it more believable. So I am going to go into spoilers right now. Even my spoilers are not going to be extremely spoilery, I feel, except for the ending. I am also going to talk about the ending. But if you want to read this book and if you want to go into it with knowing as little as possible, then I would suggest backing out of this video right now. So spoilers are going to start now. So I talked about how heads are being used to produce meat, but what I really liked here, and liked is definitely the wrong term, but what made the parallels even stronger is that these humans are also being used for other things and other resources, such as leather. And this is really discussed in the beginning of the book already, where you have this person who requests special types of skin, because this is high in fashion right now, and he stresses that the skin shouldn't be damaged, which of course already gives you a hint of how these humans are being treated in the slaughterhouses. And I thought that that was a very strong way to begin the book. But we also hear how they are being used for hunting, and how the rich are hunting these humans, and how you can also almost how they make a game out of it, where somebody who has high debts can be hunted, and if he survives for a certain period of time, then his debts are gone, which I think is very... It again shows that if you have money, you definitely have an advantage, and that the poor are being targeted here, which is of course also very clear with the scavengers who do not have enough money to buy human meat, because this is very expensive in general, and how they are, you know, standing at the slaughterhouse and waiting for meat to arrive one way or the other. I also thought that a very strong scene was where the scavengers actually attacked a transport vehicle, and how they were so vicious in attacking the heads, but how they also attacked the truck driver, and how the people who were working in the slaughterhouse had of course a very different reaction towards the truck driver being attacked and partially eaten, and then the heads, while they are both human beings. So I also found that that difference between those two events was very striking. Now, what I thought was, for me especially, very personal, was how you have this doctor who also does testings on these humans. And this had a very strong Mengele vibe, which is also being said in the book, that they called her Mengele, or a Mengele lookalike, but that now that using these humans is more legalized and it's more normalized in society, people start to see that this is really the right way to go about. And I myself am a biomedical scientist, so testing on animals is something that is very normalized, and in a lot of times the advantage that we get is bigger than the disadvantage for these animals. But when you then change this into using humans, that's again that feels very wrong, and of course it has a very clear connection to our own history during World War II, which I found was again very hard hitting, how this was being presented and how you definitely see our main character not liking this. And because of that, because he sees a lot of things and he doesn't like it, he doesn't eat meat since the death of his son, which I thought was a very interesting addition to the story. And then he doesn't really like the hunting of these humans, and he doesn't like the human experiments. So all of this makes you think that he's actually living in a society that he doesn't agree with, but he can't really say that in fear of losing his job and other things. He also has a lot of problems with his wife, who left after they lost their son, which is also the reason why he stopped eating meat. So all of that makes you think he's not agreeing with the society. And then when he forms this relationship with this human, and I think that he calls her Helena, but I will put here the actual name. I think it's Helena, but I don't really remember anymore. At least he gives her a name, and he keeps her in his house, and she becomes pregnant by him. So all of this makes you think that he actually wants to have a relationship with her, even though these humans are very different to the ones that aren't being kept as pets. And I think that that's also something that I found very striking and something to think about, because these humans by now are born as pets. They are not born as humans that interact with each other. And they also remove their vocal cords, or at least damage them, so they cannot scream, they cannot make any noise, which of course makes it easier living or having a job in the slaughterhouse. So they also don't learn how to communicate with each other, or at least not through any vocal ability. And then you have these studs who are basically used, again this is very graphic, but you have females. This is a stud who can almost sense that a female is in heat, and when he mounts her, that's when the people in the slaughterhouse know that they need to inseminate the female. So all of this makes you think that yes, these are humans, but they are actually very almost closer to animals by how they react and how they engage with each other than how we engage in a normal society. So this is again also nature versus nurture, which is something that I need to think about a little bit more, to be honest. But I think that this was definitely also a topic in the books that might not be up to the forefront as much, but that it's definitely present. So when Marcus has Helena into the house, he also needs to adjust some things because she's never seen a television, she can't talk to him. You also, of course, have a very difficult power dynamic because they have a relationship, but I don't really think that Helena can actually decide on that herself, because she is in a very strange place, and she doesn't really know how to respond. And I also think that if you are not taught anything, and if you can't talk, in the end this is going to set you back mentally, and this is going to give you a disadvantage. So even though Helena is probably 20 years old, I don't know if she would be mentally 20 years old. So all of that takes place, but Marcus actually takes pretty good care of her, especially when she is carrying his child. And then in the end, of course, you have Helena giving birth to a child, but the birthing isn't going the way it should. Marcus is estranged from his wife after the death of their child, but when he sees that the childbirth is going wrong, he calls his wife, who is a nurse, and she comes to help. And what happens then changes your whole perspective on the book, because during the entire book you think that Marcus is the good guy. You think that he is keeping a secret what, the relationship that he has with Helena, because he knows that this is actually illegal, because you can eat humans, that's fine, but you cannot enjoy them, is how they call it in the book. And because in the past there have actually been some very gruesome instances of farmers enjoying their heads and keeping them in a box underneath their bed, which was very disturbing to read. And so now it's illegal to do that. It's illegal to keep them as slaves as well, because apparently being a slave is worse than being eaten piece by piece, which is also very gruesome because Marcus' sister has a house head and he sees the house head in a cooling room and the arm is cut off because that's what they're eating at the moment. So they are literally eating these humans piece by piece, and that's wrong, but keeping them but not illegal. So that's all fine. But then keeping them as slaves, that's something that's punishable by becoming a head yourself. So it's very looked down upon. So, and of course Marcus sees this and he also disagrees. So throughout the book, everything you see is making you think Marcus is against this and he wants to keep his son, so his child, and he wants to keep Helena or as a wife or as something, even though the relationship is very off balanced, and I don't really think that it's okay in this society. It's probably better than anything else what would happen to her. But then at the end, he gives the child to his wife. And that's when you start to think, something is wrong here. And you have Helena, who wants to hold the child. And what happens is basically Marcus deciding that he's going to slaughter Helena. Because now he has this child, he has his wife back, who left him after the death of his own son. And so now he has what he wants. And it really makes you think if this was his goal all along. If he just wanted to have a child and he wanted to have his wife back, and Helena was a very good way to get there and he didn't really care about her at all. Or if this is something that happened because he had to call his wife. And I do definitely think that it's the first. That he was struggling with his worldview, especially because his son was dead. And unfortunately, and this was something that he struggled with. But then once he actually had his son back, or another child, everything was fine, and you actually see that he doesn't really care about these heads. And that was something that really made me rethink this entire book. Okay, so my camera just died. I had to recharge the battery, so that's why it was cut very abruptly. This has never happened to me before, basically because I always do very short takes, and now I was rambling on and on and on. But there are just 3 things that I want to discuss, I think. First of all, the puppies. So I think that this is a very important scene, at least for me, because Marcus at some point goes to the zoo, which is of course abandoned because you don't have any animals anymore, or at least you don't have pets. Animals in itself are a hazard and a lot of people are afraid. You also have that a lot of animals, especially in the city, use an umbrella when they go out because they think that if a bird loses its content on them, they're going to die because of the virus. And again, this is something that I said in my non-spoiler part, that a lot of people have the criticism that they don't really believe that this dystopian society is believable because a virus that only targets animals is not believable. But in the book, it's also hinted that this virus is actually not present, or that's the cover-up story that they used. But they being, I don't know, the government, something like that, want to get rid of any unwanted people. So minorities, the elderly, the poor, the disabled, and that this is a very good way to, decrease numbers, decrease the populations, and basically have the people that you want in your society. So that's why I don't really believe, or that the criticism that these people have comes from people who actually read the book. But anyway, so Marcus likes to visit the zoo, even though it's now abandoned, and he likes to think back on his life. And at a certain point, he discovers a nest of puppies, who of course are feral because they haven't had any contact with humans. But this makes Marcus think back on his own dogs that he used to have and the traumatic experience that he had to put them down when the virus had an upmarch. So he looks at these puppies, he is pretty fond of them, and he also names them actually. So at this point you are thinking, especially because you don't know what happens to Helena, but he has this interaction with her, that he's actually a good person because you can see that he has a lot of problems with this dystopian society and with the meat industry as it is in this book. So that almost confirms what you are thinking throughout the book, that Marcus is a good guy and that he's going to treat Helena right. However, when he comes back at a later time point, he sees that the puppies are being tortured and killed by a couple of children. And he doesn't really do anything about it. So this is your first sign that he is a coward, which I think is also pretty telling for our current society, where you have minorities who are disadvantaged and taken advantage of. And then you have other people who are no part of this minority and they don't agree with what is happening, but at the same time they will not stand up for this because they don't want to get any backlash. At this point they are, they are not agreeing with what is happening, but they are not disadvantaged and they don't want to stick their neck out for other people. And I almost felt like this is similar with Marcus. And the first sign that you get is with the puppies, because he can easily step in between and maybe he's going to face some backlash, but he doesn't. Which again makes me wonder what his feelings towards Helena were and what his actual feelings towards this society are as well. Because I actually do think that the criticisms that he let us know throughout the story, he actually does have them. But he's just too much of a coward, or he feels too content with his own life the way it is to actually stand up against any of this. Which is actually a shame and makes you think about your own life and if you stand up enough for wrongdoings that you see. So that's one scene that I wanted to discuss. Then the other one is the one with the children. So he visits his sister. She has 2 children. These children were born at a time that animals were no longer used or consumed, so they don't know anything else than that humans are being eaten. And those children are really messed up. To be honest, I understand what they were trying to do, or what the author was trying to do, where you have Marcus, who was brought up in a different kind of society, and he sees how wrong this is, and he sees or he has that difficulty of the transfer between one society and the other. And then you have these children who think that this is very normal. And I think that she wanted to show this distinction between the two even more by letting the children say some very disturbing things as, Marcus, how would you taste? But at the same time, I think no children would ever say that, because I have nephews and I talk to them and none of them ever say, I wonder what that rabbit tastes like, or anything like that. I think that in general, children don't really know where their food comes from. And when you explain where meat comes from in general, they are very disturbed at first. So something is wrong with these children, and that's a minor remark that I had, that I don't think that that's very realistic. Or maybe these are just really twisted children. But that was something that made me pause and say, I don't really know if this was the best way to show the distinction. I could see what the author was trying to do, I think, but it doesn't really fit for me, and that got me out of the story a little bit. And then I think, is this the last thing that I want to say? Yes. So then you have that religion part. And so I'm a Christian, but I don't really know that much about the Bible. I'm a very bad Christian. But you do have, that Jesus Christ says, take my bloody, this is my blood, drink my blood. This is sounding really bad, but this thing. And then you have here, again, that you have these religious groups who take everything way too serious and who actually volunteer of becoming a head and being killed, basically, being dismembered and then given to the poor. And what you see here is, again, that people are definitely being coerced into doing this, and that because it's religious freedom, the slaughterhouses need to obey. This is legal. Once a month or something like that, somebody steps forward who wants to be given to the poor and to the needy. And then you, of course, also see that this doesn't happen, and that they basically just either throw away the money or just leave it outside for the scavengers, and that it doesn't really go to the people who actually need it, but that these religious groups feel like they are doing something well, while everybody can see how messed up this is. So I also found that very interesting, and you can definitely see some parallels as well in our current society, because I consider myself a person of faith, but in no way am I going to take every line of the Bible literally. So I also found that this was a very nice parallel to our own society. And I do think that that's most of the things that I wanted to say. I'm sorry for the rambling. I'm sorry that I didn't really put up a script or any type of structure into this thoughts video. But if you've read the book, then please let me know what you think. And if you want to talk spoilers, that's fine. But then please put like spoilers in capital letters in the beginning of your message so that nobody gets spoiled unintentionally. And if you want to read the book, then also let me know. And I would really like to see what you think of it when you've actually read it. So as always, I hope that you enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!